Hi, I'm Mike Le Couteur, and this is the West Block, politics, perspectives, and players.
Canada has advised Canadians to curtail non-essential international travel. These are significant steps, and we will do more.
The Prime Minister in self-isolation.
I will remain in self-isolation for 14 days. Our government will be creating a $1 billion COVID-19 response fund.
A lot of things that we're working on with the financial markets, it's going to work out fine.
It won't be easy, and that is especially true in Alberta, where we have been hit by a triple whammy.
Stay home and keep your distance. Governments are telling their citizens to take precautions to try and get the global pandemic of COVID-19 under control. But that's leading to panic and fear on the stock market as this new virus continues to spread. Here in Canada, the government announced a significant fiscal stimulus to help combat the impact of the new coronavirus. Is this enough to help businesses and workers, and how is this affecting the Canadian economy? Joining me now is Goldy Hyder, the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada, and Philip Cross, who's a Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thanks very much for being with us, guys. First with you, Goldy. With this stimulus, what are you hearing from the business community right now? Will it be enough to sustain? Will it be enough even to get us through the next month?
Well, I would suggest it's a misnomer to call it stimulus. I think what we're having here is strategic interventions on the part of government to target those that are being directly impacted. You know, from those who need EI support, from those who might need childcare support, and putting the money into health care is really the priority here because we have a health crisis. And that means making sure that our health system is well funded. There's going to be need for liquidity. There's going to be all kinds of responses that are necessary. We're in a place now where businesses are focused on their people first and foremost, and ensuring that we are doing everything that we can to comply with the requests of the public health system. I think this is when Canada really works and works well. We trust our public health officials. There's a confidence there. We actually can control how big of an impact this will have on us and on our economy by doing the things that we need to do from a healthcare perspective. The other aspect of this is the business interruption side, because it is an economic issue as well, and we're worried about supply chains. We're worried about people not being able to work. We're worried about access to services and to goods. All of these things are real considerations, and I think businesses are actually trying to go even further than our government and public health officials are saying. Anecdotally, they're saying no more than 150 in some cases, 250 is what the governments are saying. I know many of our businesses who are just saying no more than 25 people in a room. So we're doing everything we can to try and mitigate that. Clearly no international travel, no local travel unless absolutely necessary. We've canceled our own meeting that we were scheduled to have next month.
In terms of the spending, though, Philip, would you say, because the parliamentary budget officer is saying, you know, we can spend a lot more and it'll still maintain our good debt to GDP ratio. Do you agree with that?
I don't think we should be concerned with debt to GDP ratios at all. This is a healthcare crisis. It has economic implications, and we should be aware of that. But fundamentally, we're not going to solve this with monetary and fiscal stimulus or economic policy. We have to get this virus under control. If we don't do that, nothing we do in the economic side is going to stop this free fall from continuing to accelerate.
So at all costs, then?
I don't know about all costs, but you know, we should be certainly incentivizing people to have the best possible health care outcomes. That should be the priority in this. Cutting interest rates half a full percentage point is window dressing.
Yeah, and it's about containment. It's what everybody is saying. You need to contain this, and a lot of that requires social distance. You know, you read the statistics. Even Minister Hyder, Chancellor Merkel, and others have said, you know, we want to be calm, we want to be reassuring, but we also want to remind people that there is a risk here that this is going to get worse before it gets better. Minister Freeland has said the same thing. But we don't want panic. We don't want chaos. Do what the public health officials are asking you to do. But, you know, Mike, we also have to be cognizant that we're human beings. We have emotions, we have feelings, we have responses to this. And many of our businesses are starting to see enormous pressure being put on their mental health, on the health support that's necessary. The social issues that are starting to form here are very real, and we want to make sure that targeted funding is going to that, because as Phil rightly says, it's not the economic side. It's the healthcare side that'll help us get the economic side under control. And
the difficulty could be if you widen the purse strings and then spend a whole lot of money, but then people aren't going anywhere. You have pro sports leagues that are shutting down. You have Parliament that stopped, and then all of these businesses. And there are a number of businesses that are saying, "Don't worry, we'll pay you while you're home," but not the people who are earning that hourly wage. People who, potentially Mark Cuban of the Dallas Mavericks said we'll look at possibly paying the people that, you know, are selling the popcorn and whatnot. But what do you do about the other owners who aren't doing that?
What it shows is we need to weather this storm. I mean, Philip said rightly, we need to do what we need to do, the best that we can to weather this storm. And we need to recognize that the fluidity of this situation, this is temporary. We just don't know how temporary it is. We don't know how long it's going to last. We will get past this as we got past SARS and other things in our history. But we need the immediate focus that this government is putting on communicating, on ensuring Canadians and reassuring Canadians and making sure that our healthcare system is supported and doing all that we can on that front. But we also need to look a little bit beyond that, because there is going to be real collateral damage to business and to people during this process. What do we need to do at the other end of that? I would suggest that the Minister of Finance and others may want to look at an economic advisory committee that perhaps is tasked with the mid to long term. What will that recovery look like? Because we don't want to arrive at the other end and say, now what do we do? Why don't we have people thinking about that as much as we have people thinking about the immediate and the short term implications?
And Philip, how much of that thinking is going on now, do you think, behind the scenes and looking at, okay, when we finally emerge from this, if plan A goes to I mean, if this is a plan A, we may be through plan D, C, you know, and all the rest of them, but how much of that planning is going on behind the scenes right now? Yeah.
Well, I think that's the right way to think about it. Plan A should be on containing this healthcare threat. Plan B, as Goldy said, is then worrying about the collateral damage to companies and workers. That's when government should be spending more. That's where the focus of spending should be. We're not going to spend our way out of this healthcare crisis. At the end of the day, it's going to be things that don't cost the government money. Washing hands, keeping social distance, restricting travel. These things don't cost a lot of money. But obviously there's a great deal of damage that's been done to the economy. Whole industries are shutting down. I mean, you know, the stock market, Canadian companies are worth 1/3 less today than they were a couple of weeks ago. That's a massive hit to the economy.
So the planning is difficult. Does this mean that now that we know that the budget isn't coming on March 30th, do we just tear it up and start at square one again?
I think so. I think clearly this is the primordial economic issue we're going to have to deal with. It's going to be very difficult for the government to pivot that quickly. Obviously, you know, this is a classic black swan. This came out of nowhere. Nobody was expecting this. The whole budget planning cycle was going into other priorities, but I think they're going to have to pivot. This is the first, second, and third economic problem this government has to deal with now. So they have to focus on that and that exclusively.
And you think businesses want to see that, Goldy, that they want to see, okay, we've realized this has been a seminal moment. We have to move on and focus the budget on what next.
Look, the rules of the game are thrown out. This is not business as usual. It's not politics as usual. It's not budget making as usual. We are in real live time here. We're seeing it. Just look at the last week. All that's happened from your show last week to your show this week.
Right.
We are in a whole new uncharted territory here, and I think we have to stop thinking of the traditional ways of the budget's been moved or when are they going to do the economic. It doesn't matter. The truth is that every day we need to reassess what the actions are necessary to be taken, and I think the real issue here is making sure that the communication side of this is clear, it's consistent, and it's united. We're all Canadians. This is the time to set aside all our local issues and parochial issues. We can't have conflicting advice being given. I think we need clear, and I think Deputy Prime Minister Freeland is probably the best person to drive this on a day-to-day basis, especially given the unfortunate situation in the Trudeau household. But we need to be clear, we need to be consistent, we need to be unified, we need to be regular in that communication. Because every day new developments are going to force you to reassess, is what we did yesterday even relevant today, or do we need to do more?
And part of that united front, I think we saw on Friday, where you had all of the House leaders and the leaders of the parties come out together and say, okay, we've all agreed April 20th is when we'll pick this back up again. We'll take a 5-week break. How long does that last, Philip? Do you think that goodwill together, because this is still politics on this hill, and people will want political points to be made off of anything, or is this one of those situations where it's, you know what, all hands on deck, let's just be united?
I'm not going to predict people's behavior, but this is a crisis. This is a crisis like 9/11, where everything changed overnight. It's like the financial crisis in September 2008. by which time, 4 months later, the government then was planning on a surplus. 4 months later, they're running a $50 billion deficit. Governments can, and in this instance, have to pivot and change priorities very quickly. They can do it. They've done it in the past. And this is a situation where we have to do it again.
The good news is they showed us nonpartisanship today by passing USMCA, arguably one of the most important things. When we needed a good news moment, we were able to deliver a good news moment. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah. So Goldy, when you've been speaking to businesses, how long can they ride this out? Given that supply chains are being affected, and we don't know how wide this is still going to spread.
Look, this is serious. We don't know the length of this, as you note. And so it's easy for me to say, yeah, the big ones are going to be fine. They're going to be fine. Not forever. There is a runway here that everybody needs to be acting on. And so I think we're going to be entering a period of significant job losses. And this is where the EI program and the support that the government's going to be able to offer and that businesses are going to also be able to offer. I mean, we are trying our best to retain our talent, to retain our people, and to provide them the opportunities to be paid for the work that they're doing. And if they're not able to do it, I mean, you look at the example of all the kids being home now. A lot of people are going to not be able to find daycare. So we have to be accommodating, we will be, but I am saying to you that we will be quite surprised at the other end. As I said earlier, the collateral damage that's going to take place here is very real, and we should do everything we can to mitigate it.
Is it helpful at all that this is a global crisis, that it's not like we can lose talent to anywhere else, but that everybody is seemingly in this together?
I think this is like saying our debt to GDP ratio is better than the G7. Nobody cares. I care about my life. I care about my situation. It's human nature. We want to know what we're doing as Canadians to do everything we can. And as I said, largely it's in our control. We can make the policy decisions, we can make the investments, and we can make sure our behavior is responsive to what the public health officials are saying. Go get tested, isolate yourself if there's a risk, follow the rules, wash your hands, stop the touching, stay in the containment environment. We have to do exactly what we're being told to do.
Philip, from an economic standpoint, a lot of people will look at this, and I know that maybe this is not exactly the time to ask it, but is a recession inevitable, or are we already there?
I think we're already there. I don't think the Canadian economy cannot absorb the kinds of, remember, this is a repeated shock. We were close to zero growth at the end of 2019 anyways. The economy was very vulnerable. Then we had the shock of the rail blockades. Then you add to that the shock, the spreading of the coronavirus, and then you have these massive repeated shocks coming from financial markets.
The energy shock on top of all of that. We haven't even talked about that impact in the West.
Yep. So I don't think there's any way the economy can survive this. This is very reminiscent of 2008, 2009, in the sense of we're having a lot of shocks in a very short period of time. I don't think there's any way the economy can survive that. I think the only saving grace of this being a global crisis is that we can learn a bit from other countries how to control this and contain this. We can learn from the experience of China, South Korea, Italy, because the quicker we contain this, the more we can limit the economic damage. I keep coming back to, let's not pretend we can minimize this impact through economic policy. We can't. This is a healthcare crisis, and we have to make that first.
But at the same time, the Conservatives had said, even last week, look, there was no room to maneuver. There was nothing left in the cupboard. Do you think, in your mind, Philip, that we could have been better prepared for something like this?
Oh, very much so. I think that's very much the lesson of this, that it was inevitable. You never know what crisis is coming along, but you know they come along every 10, 15 years. If it's not 9/11, it's the financial crisis of 2008. These are regular, if not predictable events. So you always want to keep some gunpowder dry for the difficult times. And Canada is now entering an extremely difficult time.
I think the government's seeing that, in fairness. They made a $1 billion announcement, very targeted. As I said, these are strategic interventions. You don't stimulate your way out of a pandemic. Right? And I think that they're reserving some of that firepower, perhaps for what I've suggested, which is the recovery strategy. That's when you need infrastructure. That's when you need interprovincial trade barriers down. That's when you need regulatory reform. Those things that are holding us back, most of which, by the way, are self-imposed. We can do something about this. You can control your own destiny on healthcare, and you can control your own destiny on the economy.
But as you were saying, something that we couldn't control is this whole battle over oil now, and that was another shock that we took.
Yeah, that's very serious.
And like, where does that obviously doesn't help? Do we have to now rethink our investments on natural resources and in Alberta?
Look, a crisis like this is forcing you to reconsider everything, because as I said earlier, all bets are off, and we have to look at everything here. It's hindsight's 2020. Geez, I'm sure we had access to international markets for our trade enabling products. We don't. We do have it to the United States. There may be some kind of a global realignment taking place in here. When you think about it, a lot of places are falling into blocks. We may start re-putting our emphasis on North America and looking down south to Latin America and others, as other governments have started to do. We don't know, and it's too early to say. But the energy sector is going through a very, very difficult time. I was with Premier Kenney last week, and remarks that he made in here. There's urgent action that's available and necessary, including removing things like the clean fuel standards for a year, suspending them, regulatory agenda here, and get Coastal GasLink built. I know it's not immediate, but we need to show the rest of the world that we are building that trade enabling infrastructure.
But on the flip side, Philip, I mean, is it time for Alberta to look at this and go, we're in a business, we've put all our eggs in this basket, and the last budget that they came up with was based on a price of crude that was way higher to where it is now. Does Alberta need to look at this and go, we're at a point where we have to think of getting out of oil?
Well, I think that question denies that Alberta has made significant strides in diversifying its economy to begin with. They are nowhere near as dependent on oil as they were 10, 20 years ago. So they've gone down that road. But remember, too, this isn't just an economics that are driving down oil prices. There was a political decision. This is also a spat between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Yes, global oil demand fell from 100 million barrels a day to 97 because of this virus. But at the same time, the Saudis then announced, we're going to flood the market with an additional 3 million out of spite because Russia and Saudi Arabia couldn't get together. That's a political problem. That's a political problem that may disappear soon. I mean, these people are scheduled to have a meeting in June. There's rumors that might be moved up to April, that Russian companies in particular are putting a lot of pressure on their government, that these prices are very painful to Russia, not just Canada. So there's eventually production will be removed from the market and prices will begin to stabilize.
Mike, you have a national audience, so as an Albertan, I want to say this. This is not an Alberta issue. This is a Canada issue. The number of companies and jobs just here in Ontario alone that are reliant on the oil sands specifically, it's like 2,000 companies, over 2,000 companies. So this is a national issue.
It's all, of course, and I don't mean to pick on Alberta. Obviously, it is an issue for all, but it's something that has to be considered.
Yeah, there's no question that this is a moment in which we're all self-reflective. But the key here is to recognize of what we are. We're a natural resource economy, and we have a human resources capacity. How do you leverage those two things to build the economy of the future? We need an industrial policy. We don't have a strategy for Canada because we've had it pretty easy for the last 150 years. So maybe this moment is that moment where we all go, what are we going to do to set this country on the right trajectory economically for the next 150 years, so that our kids and grandkids, who probably going to have to paying off some of the deficit and the debt that we're going to be creating through this crisis here, what hope do we give them? It's an opportunity to do something about that as well in the long run. But in the immediate, it's about focusing on helping people today.
For sure. A lot to consider. Thank you both for joining us. Unfortunately, all the time we have right now. I appreciate it, though.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. For the West Block, I'm Mike Le Couteur.